Now I wanted to compare some of the different calls for deer. And, you know, I think a lot of times people focus on, well, this is when you use this call and this is how you use it. And it pumps you up because you think, well, if I use this call this certain way and I want that buck to come over here, or if I sneak in and I think this giant buck's here, he's going to come running. And it doesn't always work out that way. In fact, it works out very little that way too. And so I want to compare some of the calls. Every time you use a call, you have the opportunity to spook a deer, spook a buck. And so I want you to look at it that way, as far as it's not necessarily what call is best overall, which we'll talk about, but it's what call will you not spook deer and ruin your hunt. And so you're always walking that balancing act, that tightrope of use this call, spook deer, use this call, don't spook deer, use it too much, spook deer, use it not enough, you don't attract deer. So you're always walking that fine line between spooking and not spooking, attracting and not tracking. And I wanted to have you look at this in a little bit different way. And I've measured, just based on experience and 38 years of hunting, what really has worked throughout the years and what I've seen spook deer. And we're going to discuss each one of these real quick. And I just scored them. And part of that score I want you to consider is not the overall, just the overall effectiveness of the call and when to use it, but how risky it is. And so consider that. And there's always a case, it's the rut, it's the last day, and you want to throw a Hail Mary out there. Some of these are a Hail Mary, and the time you use them, it's a Hail Mary. But what I've found throughout the years of shooting, let's say 35 to 40 bucks that are that 4 years old of age or older, is that you have to be very careful when you're hunting those bucks. I found that blending into the woods, sitting down, shutting up, and really blending in and not disturbing the deer herd has always been the best approach. Making sure your scent is blowing away from the deer. Your setup, your stand location, your approach, so critical. How you identify deer moving from this location to bed, this location to feed, or vice versa. Here's where they cruise during the middle of the day during the rut. Here's where they hit late season food sources. Here's how to find it on public land or put it together on private land. Those will ultimately lead to success. These are some of these little Hail Mary times. And especially a couple of these when I have a buck that's near me, but not close enough for a bow shot, and I want him to come closer. So first one we'll talk about is a Snort-wheeze. Out of Snort-wheeze, antlers, bleat, grunt tubes, I ranked a Snort-wheeze as the least effective overall, only because it's such a risky call to use. I gave it, on an aggressive scale, a 10 out of 10. It's highly aggressive. It's a challenge. So that Snort-wheeze. I don't have a Snort-wheeze.
None of us do it?
That's kind of...
You don't have one that
I don't have a Snort-wheeze call, but it's... If you ever heard that, it's not a buck just saying, hey, I'm here, I'm going to go eat some food. It's more, I see another buck, I don't like you here, and I'm going to Snort-wheeze at you because it's very aggressive. Now, if you have a couple year-and-a-half-old bucks, 2.5-year-old bucks, they might not even do that. Last year, I had a buck, a 4-year-old, we called LL Beams. He's a beautiful 5-year-old buck this year. He came into a field, opening day gun season, into a food plot, and there had already been several other bucks, up to a 3-year-old 8-point, some does, fawns, younger bucks. When he came in, he came up to that top, stiff-legged, darker body, darker antlers, older buck, doesn't see a lot of sunlight because he's back in the shade all the time, hiding in the woods, and not out prancing around out in the open fields like the younger bucks, getting bleached white. So he comes in, and he immediately gets to that knoll where he can survey the entire food plot, and you can just hear it. I have a video of him where I put it out on social media. You can barely hear it. But that's a sacred sound. A lot of people can hunt years and not hear that sound because it takes an older buck, takes one that feels like he's a little bit more dominant, and that's what they do. You can even see Dylan shared a frame on today's video of LL Beams walking by, and there's a younger buck in the foreground, and when LL Beams walk by, you can tell he's posturing. He walks by kind of stiff, kind of looking out of the side of his eye at that younger one that looked like a little spike or something. But that buck was just staring at him, just glued to him, because he didn't want to get his butt kicked. And that's LL Beams. That's that dominant buck. He's a 5-year-old. That's that Snort-wheeze. Now everyone, I don't do this very often, but I really appreciate you watching the channel, watching the videos, and First Lite has a sale right now. It starts October 2nd. It's whitetail week all week. It's up to 40% off, and it's some of my favorite whitetail gear, including the Solitude, the Sanctuary, the Catalyst, a lot of the layering systems. There's a link in the description. I didn't want you guys to miss out on this, so here you go. Check out the link, check out the sale, and thank you again for watching the channel and for all your comments. I appreciate it. If you have, this is a very aggressive call. I put, overall use score of -8, whatever that's reflective to, we'll talk about. But I basically took how aggressive that call is and your chance to spook a deer and subtracted it from the overall use of when you'd use that. And I don't think it's a very good one to use very often, but it's a great Hail Mary call. You look all the way across the field, it's 300 yards away, and you have a giant crossing. I think it might have been an old Drury Brothers video where I saw a buck, there was a buck on the TV walking across this giant old heavy 8-point, and someone snort-wheezed and that buck came all the way over to him from several hundred yards away. It's a louder call, it can be heard a long ways away, and if you have a big buck posturing and walking dominantly through a field, you have no chance at, and they ended up shooting him with a bow, then a great Hail Mary to get that buck. But if you're sneaking back into a bedding area for a nice rut hunt, and you're going to sit there all day, you're going to sit there all morning, odds are good that you're going to have good deer movement. Not a good call. Because there's so many deer, I think many more bucks that would have responded negatively to that call. Even one that's posturing through a field. It's a Hail Mary. Buck wasn't going to come any closer. Maybe you don't have to manage your sits. Maybe you're not hunting there tomorrow, the next day. Maybe you're hunting public land, you're hunting this spot, that spot, cruising around. But there are so many bucks, I believe personally, that will respond negatively to that Snort-wheeze over the ones that respond favorably. And it might be 8-2, 10-1, 15-1, I don't know. But a lot of older bucks get that way because they're super shy. They're not responding to calls. There's a lot of hunters throwing calls at them. They avoid other deer. They avoid hunters. They avoid confrontation. And that's why they get to be an older age. I'll give you just a quick story. I've told this before. Camp Kuzno Deer Research Facility up in Shingleton, Michigan. Now, sorry, I apologize if I get the details mixed up, but they would rank these bucks in there in order. And this is coming from John Azoga, someone who was a part of that whole thing, a deer research biologist up in the UP of Michigan. Probably, I think, the most quoted research biologist in the country. But there was a buck in there that was, let's say, 12th, 15th on the pecking order. Might have been a 4-year-old. Had a similar buck, similar size buck that was very dominant. And with that number one buck, there'd been a lot of buck deaths or injuries in the enclosure because it fought, and it fought hard. It ended up dying from fighting. So this other buck that was 12th or 15th all of a sudden just became number one. And that buck reigned for 8 years, 6 years, 7 years, whatever it was, a long time, and didn't die because of fighting causes, and no other buck died during fighting causes or had serious injury during that time because it set the tone of feigning and faking, posturing, not actually getting into a fight, and using its brute size and moving at the deer, kind of like Ella Beams walking by that little buck, and kept everything calm. And that's an example of a buck that if it was going into a serious fight, it probably wouldn't go. It actually ruled the roost by being very passive, and that set a tone for the rest of the herd. Interesting story. Just think about different buck personalities. Come down to number 2, antlers. I think antlers are very effective. I've seen someone pull in, it seems like a dozen bucks in a row down in Texas brush country that just keep coming in. So in areas where you don't have a lot of pressure, hunting pressure, other hunters, then antlers can be a great way to bring that buck in. These are some sheds we had, and I like, this one's a little bit smaller. I should really cut some of these down like these brow tines. They can smack your knuckle, but bringing these in, I like that louder sound, the horn, something to rub them against. But it's not like you're just bang, bang, bang. Think of those bucks fighting. They're hitting and they're really pushing into each other. You should get kind of tired doing this when you're doing it. I actually have a rattling bag. I don't mind these. These have been great for long distance public land hunts where I don't like taking a lot of gear out with me. A lot of times they're not even hardly using a pack. But these are nice because you can have that initial push and you're just rubbing them together using friction and push them together as if they're fighting. And I like it even more like you're not going like this. It's more You just imagine those two bucks pushing into each other and pushing back and forth. Also very aggressive. And so there's certain bucks, I believe, especially in high hunting pressure states, where they hear these kind of calls all the time, let alone a snort-wheeze, but rattling antlers is also aggressive. When I've called in a buck and shot it, it literally was coming to the creek system in the UP, got to the creek system and it's flooded. It came down on the downwind edge of that creek system from where I was sitting, trying to circle around me. And that's what I see a lot with rattling antlers. Those bucks will come in circling around because they're coming into a fight. Some of those bucks don't even want to come into a fight, so they're not going to come in. But the ones that do, a lot of times circle downwind. And what I find is as the hunting pressure goes up, the bucks that respond to rattling antlers, the age of the bucks that respond to rattling antlers goes down proportionally. So as the number of hunters goes up, the age of the bucks that respond goes down, which has a lot to do. And it's not to say you can't find 1,000 acres where there's no other hunters and they won't respond to calls differently than somewhere else. There's always those exceptions. But the point is that anywhere you have people that are calling a lot, and you have a place in Wisconsin where we used to hunt, and the neighbors started guiding deer on it. And we heard this diesel truck come across the field, drop a hunter off. All of a sudden you hear rattling, you hear snort-wheezing, and you hear all this noise and all the deer running from a quarter mile away where that other hunter was dropped off on the neighbors and coming out to the food plot we were on, just looking back, just trained. So those does were really edgy on that food plot. If we had an older buck 400 yards away from that guy that was calling and spooking all those deer, he would have looked at the deer and the posture that they had out in that food plot, and he probably wouldn't have come out into the open. He might have sat back there and kind of looked out and looked at the body language and said, hey, this is something stressful is going on. That's an older buck. Difference between does and fawns, young bucks. And so rattling antlers can be very effective in the right circumstance. I always like to make sure my downwind is blocked if I'm calling in. I had these because I tried them last year. You know, get in close to a bedding area where I know that there might be a mature buck bedding, but that buck can't get downwind to me because of elevation. Big open hardwoods where it doesn't want to travel through a swamp or a waterway like a flooded creek, flooded river, something like that, where they can't get downwind of you, open horse pasture, cow pasture, something like that, where they just don't want to go out in the open around you, and that's that perfect setup. But I wouldn't do it overly. You know, people talk about rattling. Well, you need to do it every hour. I don't want to do it an hour and a half before dark. You know, if I'm sitting for a 4-hour sit in the afternoon, maybe I'll do it twice. But I don't want to throw a Hail Mary the last hour. Might wait, do it when I first sit in the stand, let things settle down, and then do it again. But I'm not going to do it over and over again, especially those morning sits during the rut. I'm hunting natural movement. Again, that's what's always led to success. About one mature buck every 5-6 sits. So I don't want to ruin that sit potentially with a buck that I don't really know his personality. And there's a high likelihood, not as high as a snort-wheeze, but it's pretty high in rattling antlers. You're going to spook them away. And what I like to do first with any of that is if I'm going to rattle, then I might use a just simple grunt tube. And I like this. This is old True Talker. If you can get these, this is an old one, but it has a really natural guttural sound, not a hollow sound. Really light. This one is a similar one, but it's a little bit louder. It seems like they had to make them louder the older they got. But really light and guttural sound, where some of these get a little bit more hollow sounding. Don't like that. I mean, it sounds like a little baby buck that's running in.
Does it flip to bleat? See that little switch?
Yeah.
Try that. Oh, that's even worse.
Yeah, it is. So, yeah. I play around with these a lot. I just sit back in here. Right, Dylan? You ever heard someone play Jingle Bells on a grunt call? Now you have. But some of these are hard plastic and they just make... They make that plasticky sound. This one I thought would be pretty decent. It's got a rubber coating on it. It's almost too loud. And you can tell, like, when you hear an older buck, it seems to make more that guttural sound where it's a little bit older. And I think that can even be aggressive. And so that's why I gave it an aggressive point of 1. These are not very aggressive. Don't spook a lot of deer. If I had a buck that's coming to me or coming near me and I have a chance of shooting with a bow anyways, I'm not using this, even though I don't think it's very challenging, because then they can spot you. They know exactly where that sound came from. They'll keep an eye on you when you're coming in, just that area. And they're going to be looking for another deer, and that's when they can find you. But these are great for when a buck is going by, it's 45 yards away and not getting any closer. You blow this, a couple soft grunts. Once that deer stops and looks your way, put it away, get your release out. Only if it moves and starts going away further would I think about using the grunt call again. And I've made that mistake before on a big buck where he stopped, looked my way. 45 seconds later, I get impatient, blow it again. He just turns and walks the other way. And he wasn't with a doe or anything. It's just that a lot of times I don't know what they're processing in their head, but they want to come over. And they're going to. They might make a couple rubs first to scrape. And I find the older the buck becomes, a lot of times, the slower he is. You want him to work on your time, and he's going to work on his time. And you got to be very patient, even with something like this. So I like, a lot of times, call this, wait 10, 15 minutes, see if something comes around. And I might even use a little bleat call, which we'll talk about next, which is very, very low impact. Deer bleat all the time. Fawns bleat all the time. I love this little can. I've called in a buck with the can and used. But very low impact. So I might use that and then a grunt, a couple grunts. And then that way we can call maybe call a buck in that is near, because they have to be really close to hear these grunts. I'd say once you get out 75, 80 yards, if there's any kind of wind, they're probably not going to hear you. So it has to be very, very quiet. Not going to hear you that far. Great way if you're near a bedding area, just a couple times and see what comes out. But then I'd step to the antlers if I really wanted to call. When I'm grunting, I'm not, it's more, move your head a little bit. I think deer are really good at hearing sounds, so they know that sound's being shot out this way, shot out this way, shot out that way. I think it almost would hit them. They're not thinking, well, that buck's walking. They're just thinking, well, that sounds natural. I got to go check it out. And so, but I'm using very, very light and non-aggressive grunting. Not even like a growl. A growl to me is more like rattling antlers and snort-wheeze, where a lot of times when you hear a buck growl, it's a fight. And it's a drop-dead fight. And so, not necessarily all the time, but it's pretty aggressive compared to just some soft grunts like that where you're trying to get a buck to come on over. Not very aggressive. So I gave it a 1 on the aggressive because you could spook something, especially if it's a louder, deeper grunt, you use it too much. But really effective. And effective meaning that a lot of times a buck will come over and investigate. We've had a lot of instances where a mature buck goes by, we can't get a shot because of a bad angle, or it surprises you, it's near the stand, and then you hit that when it's out 20, 30 yards and it stops, looks your way, put it away, and then you end up getting a shot. Bleat, I gave this a lower effect, on number 3 here, I gave it a lower effectiveness than even antlers or a grunt call, just because a deer hears bleats in the woods all the time. And so to me, it's not like, it's that certain time. It's that buck that's seeking. He's looking for a doe. Middle of the rut. Pre-rut, he's probably got does around him already. He knows where they're at. They're already making noises. And so when he's actively seeking and looking in the middle of the rut, I love this. I love this type of call. Just for him going and hearing that, it can actually carry a little bit further. In a combination with this and grunts, I'm never in the woods without my grunt call. I am in the woods without the bleat call, even though I like it a lot. And I am out of the woods a lot, or I'm in the woods a lot without the antlers in here, let alone a snort-wheeze. Snort-wheeze, that's why I don't even have a snort-wheeze. It's more, they're blowing in my hand. And that's really, I've had a buck come into me on a snort-wheeze, raking up the woods on the outside, moving a fence with a rub on, making a rub, hitting the fence at the same time, finally coming into me, walking under me. And it was after shooting light, and after hours, I could barely even see his antlers. So very, very aggressive buck that came in. I was actually snort-wheezing at other bucks out in the field that were fighting 200 yards away, and he came into me from the opposite direction. Whether he came into me or the other ones, either way, he came right below my stand. He eventually thought that he was coming into me to a fight. Bottom line is, think about that when you go out into the woods next time. There's different levels of attractiveness. There's different times to use each one of these calls, but each one, minus maybe the bleat call, unless you overuse it, can be used to spook deer too. Consider that when you're out hunting, and that fine line between calling too much, calling too little, potentially spooking a deer with being over aggressive, either with over calling or even just the call that you use, and then not calling enough. And a lot of times when it comes to not calling enough, I really truly have found that just blending into the woods, get into your stand, using the right approach, right wind, understanding the line of the movement that you're hunting, whether it's a cruising line during the rut or a bedding to feeding line or vice versa the rest of the year, that'll pay the biggest dividends going forward deer hunting for the rest of your life. Now, I appreciate you guys watching the YouTube channel, but I don't know if everyone knows everything that we have to offer, whether it's on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, our website, our WHS Wildlife Blends, our seed company. Also, Instagram you can check out. I'm very active on Instagram, putting strategies on there, photos of what we do every day. Much more active there than Facebook. But our seed, web classes, books, clients, articles. I have over 600 articles on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, everything whitetail strategy. Of course, we have hats on there, and then make sure to check us out on Instagram again. But lots of stuff to offer. We're always coming out with new things, and this isn't the end of it. We have more things coming soon. Make sure to check us out.